here. Actually, this pandemic is an opportunity, right? Because we are all getting together virtually without having to fly or even, get physically try and get together and find an appropriate time in the diary. So I'm starting with a positive out of this crazy world that we're living in. And I guess, 57 of you are risk seeking. I'm one of them. And I guess I'm hoping that, through this interaction that we're going to have a good discussion on what is this all about and how is this pandemic affecting the world and how risk management is actually helping or even elevating the profession, the risk management colleagues around the world and how they are dealing with this particular pandemic. But brief background, thank you very much. I'm an engineer. So you are an actuary and I'm an engineer. So if you cut us through the bone, you'll find an engineering mind and an approach to operational way of dealing with matters. That's me. And I've been doing this for 20 plus years across multiple countries, a few industries, obviously engineering, but obviously insurance and reinsurance more recently. What I love about ERM, enterprise risk management, it's a science and an art, and it's the combination of both, and no one can win over each other because it's required in order to deliver the best way forward. And I'm hoping that during our conversations, we'll draw that out today. Great question from Joachim about, is it all about capital or what? So over to you, Joachim, to start the conversation.
Thank you very much. So let's start with the idea of when Solvency II started, perhaps just like Q&A. The concern then was to try and look at the lesson learned from the banking crisis. And remember the paper that first came out from the Europa then was about lesson learned from the banking crisis. How do we avoid the lesson learned? Because the banking had the Basel II and they had the capital regime with that. So from your experience and having gone through that process, what has changed from the focus in terms of capital management and how, I want to talk about capital for the underwriting firm first. How has the enterprise risk come in to begin to validate, support the thinking around effective capital management within the underwriting outfit?
So as you know, I'm going to speak qualitatively. So Solvency II, pillar one was always in place from what I understand for years. So this is all about the pillar two. And when Solvency II came in, it's nearly 10 years now, if coming up to 10 years, it's about the governance. It's about bringing that governance and making sure that all the functions and all the units in an insurance company are working together. So from an underwriting standpoint, and they prescribed an underwriting policy with specifics that go into that particular policy. So hence drawing it back to the governance standpoint. And that's what we do as risk professionals. We build those governance flows. We've built those policies. We work with boards. I will take it a step further and say that we have a standalone risk committee, which is not a combination of a risk and audit committee, one of the big wins from the risk management profession. And then everyone has their place in a pillar two Solvency II environment. So underwriters know what need to be doing. Oversight from a second line of defense, the risk function, setting limits, which are qualitative and quantitative, and tolerances and risk appetite and limit statements, which permeate down to the first line, to the doers, to the underwriters in this particular case, and reporting that up to the board and having the full transparency. This is what Solvency II has achieved in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. And then when we started looking at the idea of governance, roles and responsibility came up, fit and proper was there. And then the conversation about linking it to the business, the strategic plan. So what was in place before then? How would you describe the risk wall before that thinking about bringing it in to drive the business strategically? And also what's been your experience between the transition and where you see how your role and helping to shape the strategy And perhaps we'll talk about OSA later. Yeah.
So it's definitely elevated our role as a risk function, because before, obviously, there's been risk management. The Institute of Risk Management started the risk profession really from 1986, but really Solvency II coined the second line of defense, and the actual function that you need to have in place, a separate head of actuarial function. You need to have in place a separate audit and a separate risk committee. So by putting the governance in place, everyone sort of understood then where they fit, which hat do they wear. And prior to that, to your excellent question, actuaries were doing risk. Head of actuarial function was doing other functions as well. It was a bit of a blend and not a really clear risk accountability matrix in the insurance world. And why was that put in place? In order to protect the ultimate consumer. AOPA put this in place following the banking crisis, as we said, that insurers should be solvent, should be fit, should be governed appropriately in order to protect the consumer's interest. And this governance, which I'm keep going back to it, is fundamental, because if you're Solvency II regulated, then you have an ORSA, own risk solvency assessment. It's clear of what one should see in that ORSA. There are also other regulatory returns, the RSR that goes to the regulator. So it unifies the industry, it unifies those who serve in the industry, and it gives comfort to the layperson on the street who is not an insurance person, that they will be protected and their claims will be paid adequately if the particular claim was underwritten appropriately and the policy was fit to deliver that particular peril. So it really goes back to the first principles. But again, I will keep going back to governance and putting that governance in place.
Pastor, thank you for that. I mean, you mentioned something about bringing everybody together. So that means, yeah, beyond looking at it to look at the solvency requirement, looking at the capital adequacy, there's something else that the emergence of this role brought to the industry. Can you expatiate a bit more in terms of what has it brought together more in terms of bringing the business together to look at things from a cohesive point of view?
Yeah, so exactly, you mentioned the capital requirements and the solvency capital requirements and all the mathematical formula that go in there in order to maintain that solvency position, which is regulated. So you've got all the finance and actuarial people working together, so for the first time, in order to implement Solvency II. But around those people, then you've got the governance people. So you've got compliance and risk management and HR and the managing director and the chief operating officer, all coming together to deliver that. So I'm still sort of talking about the governance, but it's these people who were working in silos and experts in their own fields prior, now having to work together to deliver a common goal. And then you have the committees, obviously 3 lines of defense, and educating the board of directors and the non-execs to what this is all about. So I remember there were so many training sessions to educate non-execs who had no idea what an ORSA looked like, what to expect in an ORSA, and how to even challenge appropriately the effectiveness of the ORSA. Because somebody's an actuary telling you these are the numbers, you take it as read, or how do you challenge that? And that's been the learning curve of numbers and qualitative coming together for the first time to deliver an appropriate response.
Fantastic. Thank you. Interestingly, I'm going to give the audience time to ask questions very soon. I just want to talk about the ORSA. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy, I think the ORSA brought everything to life because, and I just want us for you to be able to dive into what were the opportunities that the ORSA brought to the insurance company first, but also to all the key stakeholders. Why was it really, really unique in the role of the ERM or risk function?
back to governance. So it tells you clearly what you need to do for the next 12 months, and it keeps you honest on delivering that. Because if you don't deliver an ORSA, then you don't have a job, right? So that's what I say to my team. So everything hangs together. The risk assessments are not just done just for fun. They're done bottom up, all the way up to the board through the risk committees, X amount of times per year. Those will feed into the ORSA. The capital projections through the actuarial function happen at a particular time in the year. The finance department working with those guys to deliver those at a particular time of the year. Then, of course, you have HR, then you have COO, you have IT, security, all the operational risk areas that go in there. Scenario planning that goes in there. Senior management sit down and agree those scenarios and go through workshops. It's brought everyone together and keeps them on that 12-month timeline. What do you need to do? So you need to work backwards. And that makes ORSA a continuous process. You don't just do it at the end of the year and be done with it. It starts and carries on throughout the 12 months. And then, you know what? By the time you've done it, you do it again. And that's how it keeps every company on the same level.
Fantastic. And it's interesting. I like the fact the way you mentioned the idea of the scenario planning part of it, which I thoroughly enjoy. Let us cast our mind back about 1.5 years, and we're planning ORSA. And you're trying to plan for 2020, which normally year-end you do your capital production, perhaps might need a contingency capital planning, looking at all your underwriting process, looking at reserving assumptions and some other assumptions. How has the discipline of the ORSA and that integrated approach helped during the pandemic?
So we always looked at the emerging risks and the World Economic Forum report, which is sort of, everyone's waiting for that to come out from Davos. And, pandemic was always somewhere there, or infectious diseases just somewhere there and moving up and down. From my experience as Reinsurance Group of America, obviously, that's what we reinsure. So that was always on a scenario and, and a stress to withstand the pandemic. So that was always part of our ORSA planning, and paid off, right? Because we're in business and everything's fine. But then other organizations quickly realized that by doing this process and rehearsing the process, and I guess we'll come to it later on when we discuss lessons learned from pandemic. It's good to see. It's very good to see that organizations have been resilient and adaptable because of the learning of how do we go about identifying future risks. Okay, now we're in a 2020-2021 pandemic, and how do we quickly respond to those threats? You wouldn't be able to do that so quickly and effectively if you hadn't been following, as I responded to the earlier question, of everyone working together, a 12-month time frame, everyone knows where they stand. It's like a military operation, really, if you think about it. You tactically prepare for something and you rehearse it all the time, but when you have to execute it, it's not always exactly what you were expecting it, but the preparation allows you to at least give it your best shot.
Fantastic. And that takes me to the place of performance. So what I'm hearing from you is that there's something about this risk role now that is now diving into the performance, the core and the output, expectation, dividend, return on capital for the shareholders. Can you just speak a bit more into that, how that discipline is now going to performance now?
So it started with building an ORSA and started with building frameworks. It started with building all the governance arrangements and the policies and putting all these things together, the building blocks for Solvency II. But then that 12-month timeline that I was describing, there's a risk culture that permeates across the organization, tone from the top. And the second line, head, CRO, head of risk, whatever you want to call that particular person who's leading that function, is influencing how that organization is performing. So that person is speaking to the CEO, that person is speaking to the COO, that person is speaking to the board of directors. That person is speaking to the regulators. That person is shaping how the organization is moving in a risk way. So to your point of 57% are seeking, averse 22 are neutral, that person is shaping that response and that organization, which of course inevitably feeds into strategy, planning, 3-5 year budgets forward. So always looking ahead and doing that horizon scanning. So that role now is embedded, should be embedded in that organization and being a key partner in moving the organization forward.
Thank you. And while you're saying that, I just remember one of the fundamental definitions we look at, the ISO definition of risk, which is the effect of uncertainty on objective. It's almost as if it's absolutely impossible now to discuss risk without performance or objective. It seems as if traditionally there's a bit of a disjoint in terms of what risk is intended to do. Now, can you shed light more in terms of this movement of actually zooming into the act of delivering the effect on the objective and how that has shaped the emerging perception of the role of the risk function or the CRO? Because traditionally, that connection was not there. Now, the CRO is asking, what are we trying to achieve? And somebody will be thinking, why are you asking that question? And so, can you please shed more?
Yeah, I mean, the building block to that response is the ORSA. So by having done the ORSA so many times now, so many iterations, one can see how that fits with strategy. You cannot do an ORSA in isolation outside of strategy. Hence why when I mentioned earlier governance, and I'll go back to the governance, the CRO, the risk function, is the strategic partner to strategy, because the senior leaders are setting strategy for the next 3 to 5 years, but then what are the opportunities and what are the risks? That has to come and align. So horizon scanning and emerging risks and scenario planning are key toolkits of the second line to partner and work with at the strategic setting. And there'll be a healthy debate on that, because in order to execute the strategy, you need to have some clear parameters around it. So what does good look like? What does success look like? Return on investment, but also solvency. So the Solvency II, solvency capital requirements keep you honest and not allow you to go and do crazy things and bring down the organization. That's the whole point of Solvency II. But clearly, with effective use of capital in order to pursue growth and expansion. So it's that fine balance of the head of the risk function working with the senior executive teams cohesively to deliver that.
So how do we move, because there are still lots of skeptics in most organizations, which they do think the risk function is just a waste of time, or they're just troubling me. As long as I fill the risk register, sometimes the risk register is even just artificial, not real. How do we move people on? And we'll come back to talk about the lesson learned. Seeing that these are the other things that this subject is bringing to light, how do we begin to shift? For the colleagues here, what are the things that they need to start looking at to move or to influence their colleagues into this cohesive thinking as well?
So one of the issues with the risk function has been the steep learning curve of implementing Solvency II. So the risk functions or risk consultants, or basically people with the hat risk on, they always wanted information. So then colleagues in first line look at the risk people and say, oh, they want something from me. They want me to fill the risk register in, just like you're saying now. But the first line never see the output or the why or how what the first line has inputted is being used constructively. So now risk functions in the past few years, successful risk functions are those who'd close the loop and go back to the business, go back to those hundreds of people who fill the first line. Because, we fixed the governance, right? We discussed all these senior leadership teams. The finance director now knows what the risk function is doing. The audit understands what the second line is doing. So at the top level, we know what's happening, but what about all the staff in the first line? And it's that feedback loop. You know, you reported an incident. That incident went up to the second line, through the second line, and went to the risk committee. That actually drove action and investment to make things better. It's actually making your life, first line person, better. You know, these are key risk indicators that we are monitoring, and we're telling you that from a risk standpoint, at this point through pandemic, the number one risk for you working from home or remotely is cyber. And this is what we are telling you. This is the information we're giving you, and tips on success, on you not falling part of phishing campaigns and you know, getting your computer infected. These are just few examples, but it's the communication back into the first line to make that truly, you know, bottom up and top down. And takes time, takes a lot of work. You know, it's not an easy thing to do, and risk functions are always understaffed, are always overworked. And they always want something, but then it's time to be giving back. And I think through the pandemic, it's showing how the effectiveness of second line is helping first line.
Okay, I'll come back to that. We're still going to talk about lesson learned. Let's zoom into the concept of communication a little bit. Do you think, as risk professionals, sometimes we confuse our audience because of excessive use of jargon for them? For example, I mean, going back to feedback to the guys is critical, but in terms of the terminology, the jargon, how we engage with them to use the tool to actually make decisions for it to make sense to them, do you think sometimes we can overcompensate by using risk terminology which they're not familiar with? And why is that? Does that been the why do we do that? Or what are the reasons why that mental barrier between what we're trying to tell them and what they're hearing is kind of just still there, even though we know the benefits?
So the funny thing is, Joachim, as a fellow risk professional like you and I, we know others who are also passionate and live and breathe risk management. And it's quite interesting because it's a trait that we share. So this passion for our profession is exactly the downfall for the question that you're asking, because and I'm going to use my engineering now because I love my cars and my engineering. So it's kind of, you know, the lay person just wants to drive a car and get from A to B and doesn't really care about the mechanics and how it works. But for the junkie who loves cars, you know, it's all about the technical jargon about engines and performance and brake horsepower and what have you. So in the same analogy, and it's not easy, we need to maintain the level of jargon amongst us as peers and professionals, but we need to adapt to simple English, simple business language, and what it means to the first line, because they don't live and breathe risk management the way we do. And sometimes that might be the confusing part of things. To your earlier question, it's another risk register. I gave you a risk register. What else do you want? Which is, you know, basically a risk register is just a register. Big deal. It's that communication, in the effectiveness of communication, which risk functions need to brush up on somehow.
Fantastic. Okay. One more question that we'll open it to the audience to ask you a question. Let us look at lesson learned. What have we learned? What are we going to become after post-pandemic? What do we see the role? And it'd be nice to hear the colleagues about their experiences, the way people perceive their role, especially in the last 1 year, and what kind of influence that we're making now, whether we're actually changing. But from your experience and for what's happening within what you've seen in your organization and what's happening globally in London, what have we learned and what's going to happen to the perception of this role in the organization?
We've become more human. This is the one thing that I can say globally, that I'm interacting with colleagues globally. So the opportunity of this crazy pandemic is that we can do this globally all day long. We've become more human to our human race. It's not about the employee, but the employee is sitting somewhere with a family or isolated or with grief to deal with, because the pandemic has affected every single person on the earth. So as second line, we go to the first line and say, hey, how are you doing? Is there something we can help you with? Actually, it's giving us the opportunity. Usually we did that by going and flying, and it was fun to do it, but also that human interaction. But now it's not possible. So we've visited what have we done in my department is we've visited all our countries. We've asked how people are doing. We've offered our support and how we could help them. By doing that, again, we're a second line. We can see what's happening across the region, and report up to senior management and say, look, there's an area of concern there. We can help. What can we do? So we've become faster in our communication and also more human in our communication. On the flip side of that, we're always on. We're always working. We're working 10 hours a day at least. It's difficult to switch off. In the living room, the kids are going to come home in the afternoon, and everyone else has their own challenges to deal with. The work has become a continuous thing of life. The other thing, of course, is not flexible working. The city is there. It's 10 miles away from where I live. It's a ghost town for now, but it's never going to be everyone back into work 100%, 5 days a week. That flexibility now is going to stay.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to pause for a while for the colleagues to ask, and I'm going to open up to you guys to ask questions. I'm going to take about 3 questions first, and then if you want to ask questions, you just raise your hand, show by just indicating, and I'll just make you. Thank you. Any question from anyone? Question? Okay, Joseph, yeah.
Okay, so mine is more of like a follow-up. Can he actually give maybe some more insight into OSA?
Okay.
OSA, some bit of more insight into OSA. I know it's an abbreviated word. Can he give us more insight into OSA? I think the concept may be a bit new in the Ghanaian insurance space. So some bit of insight into that.
Okay. So kind of the OSA is perhaps new. It's new. So is it possible to just give a bit of a more overview and the component, the definition of what is it, please?
Very high level. So it's the culmination of everything we discussed earlier. It's own risk solvency assessment. The company is required to do a 5-year projection on the capital requirements. There are formulae in place that the actuaries use with the finance department. I'm going to leave it at that. There's nothing else to say at this point. There's the governance in place that goes around that. There's emerging risks, there's scenario planning, there's stress tests that go into that. There are all the business requirements to deliver the plan, to deliver the strategy for that particular business unit, which the one that's being regulated by the particular central bank authority, so to speak. And then there's calculations that are included as the appendix to support the view that's given in the front pages of the ORSA. It's a big piece of work, and when implementing that, there's always been dry runs. So we never went into it. I think we had a few years of dry run, showing it to the regulator, but not not being actual until the entire industry went through it. So very, very, very high level. I mean, it's a big ticket item, and boards need to be on board and educated on what this is all about. And it's a step change for each function in the insurance company, as I mentioned earlier, because everyone needs to work together in order to deliver the requirements. One person cannot deliver the ORSA. It's a combination of all the functions.
Thank you very much. Perhaps let me just maybe add one or two to it also to in a way to complement what you said. I think there are at least three key areas when you're looking at this, at least your strategic business plan. So the whole 5-year plan you have, all the assumptions that will be behind your 5-year plan, your capital assumption, reserving assumption, underwriting assumptions, everything solid there. So you look at all that, then look at what the finance will do in terms of your capital. Now, if we're going to deliver this 5-year plan, what do we need? And based on the business we're hoping to get, let me use the risk we're taking, the number of new clients and the number of products we're going to be writing, to how we should ensure that we have enough capital. And if something happens, are we going to be able to respond? Will any of the loss, anything happen incidentally, will you wipe us away? So how can we prepare for those things? And that's where the third dimension of the risk, the uncertainty, will come to place. And then when we talk about the risk, this is not just looking at the risk register. So sadly, most people, the extent of the risk experience, just doing the risk register. So this is now bringing the whole aspect, all the techniques, multiple analysis, both reactive and proactive techniques, using the qualitative and quantitative techniques. Now, these three dimensions now begin to complement and validate one another. So the risk information should be able to validate what the capital information is and also the strategy information. And so bringing those three together and pulling them in one pot to give the view that, okay, this is what we're trying to do. Remember, strategy is uncertain. Whenever you set out to do strategy, that you're going to do something in the future, there's no guarantee that you're going to do it. So bringing the capital, the financial assumptions, and bringing the uncertainties management to it gives the regulator a bit more assurance that, okay, at least you have an idea of what you're doing. So the regulators get more confidence that if you're able to present these three dimensions and justify your basis of assumption, they have more confidence in you. And that, in presenting that, you'll be able to look at your solvency requirement, whether you have basic or extra as well, and the way they will deal with you from a risk base, based on what they see and how they think you're able to handle those uncertainties and the provisions you have in place. I think this is a nutshell to what I said. That's where I'll say also. So it's there, but traditionally those things are not integrated. And they're done in silo, but now the regulator is saying it has to be done together, and everyone must be aware of what's going on.
So for an insurance company, Joachim also exactly perfectly explained. In the ORSA, you'll find insurance risk section, market and credit risks section, operational risks section, and then strategic risks section. So what you just said is, these are the particular pillars that somebody needs to go through. Hence my point earlier that everyone needs to be involved, because all these risks that we've mentioned require the subject matter expert to input into that.
Yeah. And this is where also the importance of risk professional to really begin to grow their capability and their skill set. This is where it starts now. And one of the reasons why we're doing this is to begin to raise the bar. I think I told a group a few months ago, I said, sometimes if you're not careful as a risk professional, you can reduce yourself to doing administrative tasks of just following up on risk updates, checking the red, amber, greens. Oh, the risk has gone up, it has come down. And those activities and behaviors will not give the business and the organization the clear visibility of the importance of the value you bring in. Another reason why people look down on the risk function, because we're not rising to the level of the degree of capabilities that we have as well. So one more question. We're coming towards the end of this now. Any other question? That's the OSA. Perhaps maybe another section will bring OSA to you in full and be able to give you an overview. I think that's another thing I'll try and do with you guys. Any question from anyone else?
There's a great question from Margaret about what else can we do as risk managers, apart from just giving feedback to first line. So one great thing that we do, and we do it like this through Zoom or whatever you want to call it, an infinite amount of people can be on a call. In my organization last week with one of my team members, we ran a call for 250 people, first liners mostly, on risk incidents and what it means to them and to us as an organization on sharing risk incidents. And that's a great way to engage people. First of all, it permeates the risk culture. So, first of all, tell us, because, if something goes wrong, it will be found out anyway. So tell us in advance so we can deal with it. Senior management can deal with it. And then by responding to them and running a second line workshop with 250 people, somebody sat in one particular country in one location and another person in another country working for the same organization might be experiencing exactly the same thing, but not knowing that they are both experiencing it. So hearing it from us, that sort of gelling of, this is what we see, this is what we're feeding back to you. Let's have a healthy conversation and debate about things that are taking place around our region. We can help make things better. Remember, we don't fix things as second line. We're not the engineers that fix it, but we know the engineers who can, because we can speak to the appropriate senior management and put it on their radar for them to authorize action to take place.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, Margaret, also just to add to that, there's something I'll share with you guys now. You find that the risk function will now have to begin to go into other function as a friend, as a support. And for example, you should be able to work more within the finance function, work with the HR function, work with the strategy function, work with the actuarial function. So actually your interaction with the underwriters, different class of business, the risk tolerance for all your policies, get more into the business, also work with the HR. Now, why am I saying that? Where people's objective and performance and the culture of performance management, objective management is not clear, it makes this also we're talking about and risk management a bit more blur. Because if it will affect the objective, so you can support people in them to articulate the objective, have a clear understanding of the task, because their performance and their reward will be linked to those things. So if you come alongside and help them to deliver on the objective and understand their performance and understand those opportunities, another thing, opportunities, how can we begin to support businesses in thinking opportunities? Because that's an aspect of risk that we have not even started. Where are the innovative things we can do that can help them to grow? So these are another areas also that you can go into as well. I don't know if that's helpful, Margaret. Any other question from anyone? Any question from anyone else?
Okay, so mine is more of like an addition to what you're saying. Because I think I agree to the conversation on that aspect, because you'd find out that most of the times our functions are actually limited to updating risk register, following up on action plans, what are the mitigation plans and all that. And therefore, I mean, management will relegate you to that particular corner where you'd only be left to actually update risk registers. And as I said, the red, amber, and green to the board. But if we begin to move into more areas where our competencies or our impact will be felt more, I think management will take us more seriously. And when we come up with recommendations for us to do and bringing the conversation of opportunities on board on ESCO tables for discussion, I think it'll show our relevance more to management. And when we come up with decisions or recommendations that has to do with resource allocation, I mean, it will take us more seriously. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Alex, quickly. Alex, do you still want to ask your question?
Yeah. Okay, so it's just a brief question. So let's say where the senior managers or executive managers themselves are not really into, let's say, risk per se. So it's more of like compliance. They are mostly dealing with compliance risk management, but not looking at the holistic thing. So you as a risk manager or risk officer, how can you set the tone for them to also know that the entirety or the whole thing is actually important, but not just, okay, if there's a problem, if there's a red or there's an amber, then we deal with it.
Fantastic. So, Chris, I'll let you go first.
That's a great question, Alex. And this is all about risk culture, right? So, unfortunately, you have regulation, then you have compliance to the regulation, and then you have best in class. So if senior management are seeing risk as a something that they have to do and not realizing the opportunity of what risk management can offer them, then they're still in the compliance, ticking the box, and it's harder to succinctly explain to them that we're not just doing it to tick the box, but we're actually learning. So it's a learning organization. So, for example, back to my risk incident reporting, if you encourage your first line to tell you about incidents, then senior management can make things better. But if you ignore it and just tick the box, that's just one opportunity of encouragement to learn in order to make things better. Because let's be honest, around the world there's incidents taking place all day long in every organization, but how many of those are being reported transparently? And that has to do with culture. So that's just one small thing that can influence the change of behavior in an organization. It's not about the risk register and updating the risk register up and down, because at the end of the day, that's an exercise in itself to tell you about the profile and what you're doing about it. It's not the exercise of updating the register. It's what is it telling you, and what are you doing about it, positively or actually what it's telling you to do immediately if there's a red risk. So it's not an easy one. Sometimes regulation helps. In other words, we have to do this because of the regulator, but we need to embed in our organization and be a risk learning organization.
Yes, definitely. Cosmos. I can say Cosmos.
Yes.
And thank you very much, Socrates. Cosmos, quickly, because of time.
Yep, sorry. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank the team for this wonderful congregation. I want to contribute to what my colleague just said. I came from the regulatory background, where from the NIC, and mostly companies obeyed risk management or practice risk management because it is compulsory and not necessarily because they want to practice it. From Ghana perspective, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, but what I've gathered after working in the industry is that risk managers, we should first of all know the regulation, that's the law, because compliance risk itself is a risk. So knowing what the regulation says itself and be able to guide your company in that angle is a risk mitigation in itself. So one is compliance. Don't limit yourself to only risk management. And secondly, we should also be key about strategic risk, because management is always looking forward to improving productivity and increasing their portfolio and other things. So they come up with all sort of strategies. As risk managers, we can take it upon ourselves and research, do more detailed work into their strategies and give them better feedback to improve themselves. And I think they would appreciate our efforts rather than wait and tick boxes. That's my humble suggestion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Cosmos, for that. Also, you find that, and is it whatever we're doing that is not adding value or creating, being seen as something that's adding to decision making and bottom line, it's likely not to be taken serious. So somebody asked that, is risk management critical at the business, at the performance, business development level? Definitely. Look at it this way. I think actually, let's get something wrong. We are not the risk managers. That's another problem. The risk function calls themselves risk managers. And that misconception sometimes can kill the idea from your colleagues because they think you're the one doing risk for them. Actually, everybody else is the risk manager, apart from the person who's actually responsible. Why is that important? Because one is the objective that will be affected. Two is the performance outcome that will be affected. Two is the reputation of that person that will be affected. And if we put the collective together, actually, that's where the business goes. So from the place of business planning, the risk function must be there. Why? Because when you're planning business, is uncertain. And whenever somebody is talking about something that is uncertain, your expertise, your advice, your input must be there. So that's how you can be. But also what you can do, when I was when I went to public sector a few years ago, and the elected officials, it's difficult to convince them. I brought colleagues from the industry to come and share best practice, practical example of success in implementing risk, and minimize the word risk itself. Talk about the difference it's making in the organization. Practical examples of the change initiative has delivered, the culture changes has done, the cohesiveness, the savings, the opportunities. List all those things and say, because we understand the implication of what's uncertain and how it might affect us, these are the decisions we make. So that's another way you can engage with them, definitely. I think we're coming to the end now. Would you also please join me to say a big thank you to my colleague Socrates. It's been amazing. And we're still going to do more. This is the beginning. So I don't know if we want to give a round of applause or just say thank you for coming to share his experience with us. And just join me to say thank you. So on behalf of the team, the Ghanaian risk professionals, Socrates, we want to say thank you for your input. I think we might be calling upon you again to come and help us. I don't know whether you have a closing remark you want to give. Can you just join me? Just say thank you to Socrates, please.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Socrates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Socrates.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, thank you,
yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Closing remark. It's a journey. You never end risk management, Joachim, as you know, right? So it's an absolute journey of. There's always going to be something else. I had some notes here that we didn't touch upon very quickly.
Oh,
you know, no, it's fine. Regulatory guidelines in the UK at this point, operational resilience, things for you to talk about in the future, IT, security, cloud outsourcing. It's a journey. You know, these are new things, new risks on the horizon and opportunities of doing business. So it's never ending. That's the fun part of it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. Just for those, if you want the recording, we're going to send it through with the feedback. And there's a last box showing there just to see your appetite for the frequency of these sessions. And I'll be sending that to you. So if you want a recorded version, please fill the feedback, then you get the recording. We'll send it to everybody. Socrates, thank you so much. I'm sorry, the time is very short. Just want to make sure that I think we've learned so much from your insight. And I'm very grateful for coming along this journey with us. Thank you very much.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining this first edition. It's been amazing. I hope you've gained something. This is the beginning. We're going to do more. We'll be bringing more capital. I want to bring something on capital management. I want to bring something on reserving, something on OSA will be coming, even the current regulatory landscape that's happening globally, not just in the UK and some other places. Are you aware that the OSA, I don't know whether you're aware, in the US, the OSA is now outside the insurance industry. They're now doing it in manufacturing. So that's how much the concept of the OSA is actually now growing faster in the US. So they're doing it in manufacturing, they're doing it in supply chain industry, all the Walmarts. They're using that same principle now, which the insurance industry birthed, and applying the principle in other sectors. And it's just amazing. So that concept is something that I think I would like to talk about for you guys to actually go a bit deep into it very soon. Aaron, sorry, I couldn't take your question. If you don't mind typing it in, I'll follow up with that. So thank you very much, Socrates. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day. Please remember to connect with me online if you want to on social media. and on Twitter, on Facebook, or please just go in and just like it. Please make sure you connect, please. Thank you.